My name is Nathan Granger, and I'm 40 years old. For most of my life, I lived in the shadow of my family's expectations in Savannah, Georgia. While my younger brother Brandon charmed everyone with his business acumen and social connections, I was the quiet one, the one who preferred reading history books to networking events, the one who asked uncomfortable questions about our family's past while everyone else focused on maintaining our reputation in Savannah's high society. My parents, Robert and Catherine Granger, owned a magnificent antebellum mansion on Bull Street, complete with marble columns and manicured gardens. It was the kind of property that appeared in Southern Living magazine and hosted charity galas. Brandon fit right into that world. He wore tailored suits, drove a BMW, and could discuss stock portfolios over mint juleps like he was born to it, which in many ways he was. Me? I worked as a historical researcher for the Georgia Historical Society. I made $42,000 a year and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. I lived in a modest apartment near Forsyth Park and spent my weekends exploring old cemeteries and forgotten buildings. My family tolerated this as an eccentric phase that would eventually pass. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. When my parents died in a car accident last February, the whole family gathered at the estate for the funeral. Brandon played the grieving son perfectly, shaking hands with politicians and business leaders who came to pay their respects. I stood quietly in the background, wondering why I felt more relief than sadness. 3 days after the funeral, we sat in the mahogany-paneled office of Harrison and Associates, the family's law firm on East Bay Street. Richard Harrison, our father's longtime attorney, cleared his throat and began reading the will. Brandon would inherit the mansion, valued at $2.4 million, along with the investment portfolio worth another $800,000. The BMW, the lake house at Lake Oconee, and the family business interests would all go to him as well. And to Nathan, Harrison continued, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, your parents have left you property in Montana. A house on 40 acres near Glacier National Park. Brandon smirked. Dad always said that old place was more trouble than it was worth. Good luck with that, Nate. I said nothing. I'd never even heard of this Montana property. Harrison handed me a thick manila envelope containing the deed and some old photographs. The house looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades. Paint peeling, roof sagging, windows boarded up. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see condemned. Your great-grandmother Clara lived there until she passed in 1987, Harrison explained. Your parents never visited. They considered it too remote and expensive to maintain. Brandon chuckled. At least you can sell it and get something out of this mess. Though I doubt anyone wants to buy a shack in the middle of nowhere. I folded the deed carefully and placed it in my jacket pocket. We'll see. 2 weeks later, I loaded my Honda with everything I owned and drove 24 hours straight to Montana. The GPS led me down increasingly narrow roads until I reached a gravel driveway marked only by a rusted mailbox with Granger barely visible on the side. The house was worse than the photographs suggested. Shingles littered the ground and the front porch sagged dangerously. But the land was breathtaking. 40 acres of rolling meadows with the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance. A stream ran through the property, and I could see deer grazing in the early morning light. I spent the first night in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, listening to the wind whistle through gaps in the walls. That's when I started exploring. The next morning I began examining the house room by room. The kitchen cabinets were warped from decades of moisture, and the bathroom fixtures were rusted beyond repair. But in the master bedroom I noticed something odd. The floorboards in one corner didn't match the rest of the room. They were newer, as if they'd been replaced recently. I pried them up with a crowbar I found in the shed and discovered a metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were documents, photographs, and items I'd never seen before. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, and land deeds dating back to the 1890s. But more importantly, there were photographs of Native American families and ceremonial objects wrapped in deer hide. One document stopped me cold. It was a marriage certificate from 1923 between my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Granger, and a woman named Morningstar Wilson. She was listed as a member of the Blackfeet Nation. The certificate was signed at the Blackfeet Agency in Browning, Montana. I sat on the bedroom floor, staring at these papers, as pieces of a puzzle began falling into place. My great-grandmother Clara wasn't just some distant relative who lived in Montana. She was Morningstar's daughter, half Blackfeet, which meant I was too. There were more photographs. Clara as a young woman standing beside the very house I was now sitting in, but it looked completely different. Well-maintained, with gardens and livestock. There were pictures of her with other native families, at what appeared to be traditional gatherings and ceremonies. One photo showed her in traditional dress, participating in what I recognized as a powwow. But the most shocking document was a letter dated 1955, written in my grandfather's handwriting. It was addressed to Clara, and it was brutal in its clarity. He wrote that the family had moved beyond those primitive connections, and that she needed to stop embarrassing the family name with her savage friends. He threatened to cut off all financial support if she continued to flaunt her Indian blood. Clara had written back, and her response was in the box too. She told him she'd rather live in poverty than deny who she was. She said she'd stay in Montana, on the land that had been in her mother's family for generations, and that she'd never contact the family again. She kept her word. I found receipts showing that my parents had been paying property taxes on the Montana land for decades, but they'd never told anyone about it. They'd kept it like a guilty secret, a reminder of the family's shame they'd tried to bury. Over the next few days, I drove to Browning, the heart of the Blackfeet Reservation. I brought the photographs and documents with me. At the Tribal Cultural Center, I met with an elderly woman named Rose Heavy Runner, who worked as a genealogist and tribal historian. "Morningstar Wilson," she said, studying the marriage certificate. "I remember stories about her. She was my grandmother's cousin. Beautiful woman, very traditional. We always wondered what happened to her daughter." Rose introduced me to other tribal members who remembered Clara. They told me stories about how she'd maintained traditional practices, even after marrying into a white family. How she'd spoken fluent Blackfeet and participated in ceremonies. How she'd been heartbroken when her son chose to reject his heritage. She used to say her grandson would come back someday, Rose told me. She said the land would call him home. I spent weeks in Browning, learning about my heritage. The Blackfeet Nation welcomed me with an openness that I'd never experienced from my own family. They taught me about traditional crafts, shared stories about Morningstar and Clara, and helped me understand the significance of the land I'd inherited. The 40 acres weren't just random property. They were part of a larger tract that had been in Morningstar's family for generations. The stream that ran through it was sacred to the Blackfeet people. The meadows had been used for traditional gatherings and ceremonies. My great-grandmother had been the guardian of something precious, and now that responsibility had passed to me. I returned to the house with a new understanding of what I'd inherited. This wasn't the family's cast-off property. This was the heart of our true legacy, the part they'd been too ashamed to acknowledge. Meanwhile, my phone had been ringing constantly. Brandon, calling from Savannah, wondering when I was going to list the property for sale. I'd been letting the calls go to voicemail, but finally I answered. "Jesus, Nate, I was starting to think you'd died up there," he said. "Have you found a realtor yet? I've got a guy here who specializes in distressed properties. He thinks you might get $50,000 for it if you're lucky." "I'm not selling," I said. "What do you mean you're not selling? What the hell are you going to do with a broken-down house in the middle of nowhere?" "I'm going to fix it up." Brandon laughed. "With what money? You made, what, 40 grand a year at that museum job? You can't afford to renovate anything." "I'll figure it out." "Nate, be realistic. You're 40 years old with no savings and no prospects. Sell the house, take the money, and maybe you can afford a decent apartment somewhere. Don't be stupid about this." I hung up on him. It was the first time in my life I'd ever hung up on anyone in my family. That was the last time I spoke to Brandon for 8 months. I turned off my phone and focused on the work ahead of me. The house needed everything: new roof, new plumbing, electrical work. foundation repairs. I had $12,000 in my savings account and a dream that probably seemed impossible to anyone looking from the outside. But I wasn't doing this alone. The Blackfeet community had adopted me as family, and they understood what I was trying to accomplish. Rose Heavy Runner connected me with tribal members who were skilled craftsmen. James Running Bear, a master carpenter, agreed to help me with the structural work in exchange for documenting the traditional building techniques he'd learned from his grandfather. Maria Spotted Eagle, who ran a native plant nursery, helped me design gardens using traditional Blackfeet plants and medicines. We worked through the summer and fall, rebuilding the house exactly as it had been during Clara's time. We used traditional methods wherever possible, honoring the way Morningstar and Clara had lived. The community donated materials, time, and expertise because they understood this wasn't just about fixing up an old house. This was about reclaiming a piece of stolen history. I applied for grants from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Montana Historical Society. My background as a researcher helped me write compelling applications, explaining the cultural significance of the project. I received a $25,000 grant to document the traditional building techniques, and another $15,000 to preserve the historical artifacts we'd found. By winter, the house was habitable, but more importantly, it was becoming something bigger than just a home. Tribal elders began visiting regularly, sharing stories about Morningstar and Clara. Artists came to demonstrate traditional crafts. Families brought their children to learn about their heritage. I documented everything. I photographed the restoration process, recorded the stories the elders shared, and created a comprehensive archive of the family history my relatives in Savannah had tried to erase. I started a blog called Reclaiming Morningstar that attracted attention from historians, anthropologists, and other people searching for their own hidden heritage. The blog posts went viral. Native American communities across the country shared my story. Genealogy websites featured my research. Academic journals published articles about the restoration project and its cultural significance. National Geographic reached out about doing a feature story. Meanwhile, Brandon continued calling. His messages became increasingly frustrated as months passed without any word from me. He'd assumed I'd given up and gone back to Georgia with my tail between my legs. The idea that I might actually be succeeding at something never occurred to him. "Nate, this is ridiculous," he said in one voicemail. "I drove by your apartment and the landlord said you moved out months ago. Where the hell are you? People are starting to ask questions about why you disappeared." By spring, I was ready for the next phase. I applied to the Montana Department of Commerce to register the property as an official cultural center. The Morningstar Heritage Center would offer workshops on traditional crafts, educational programs about Blackfeet history and culture, and serve as a gathering place for tribal members and their families. The state approved the application and provided additional funding for educational programming. The Bureau of Indian Affairs offered support for cultural preservation efforts. The University of Montana expressed interest in partnering with us for anthropological research and student internships. I hired 3 staff members, all from the Blackfeet community. Rose Heavy Runner became our cultural director. James Running Bear started teaching traditional woodworking classes. Maria Spotted Eagle developed programs about native plant medicine and sustainable farming techniques. We held our grand opening in June, exactly 1 year after I'd first arrived in Montana. Over 300 people attended, including tribal leaders, state officials, and representatives from universities across the region. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the hidden heritage revealed, and the Associated Press picked up the story. That's when my phone started ringing again. This time, it wasn't just Brandon. It was reporters from Georgia newspapers, asking about the Granger family's Native American heritage. It was genealogy researchers wanting to know more about the family history I'd uncovered. It was documentary filmmakers interested in telling the story of cultural reclamation. Brandon's first call came at 6 in the morning. He was shouting before I even said hello. "What the hell have you done?" he demanded. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" "I've told the truth," I said calmly. "The truth. You've made us all look like fools. I've got clients asking me about Indian blood and scalping and God knows what else. The country club is buzzing with rumors. Mother's garden club friends are avoiding Catherine like she's got leprosy. Catherine's your wife, Brandon. She's not part of this. She's part of this family, and you've embarrassed all of us. How could you do this? How could you dig up all this ancient history and throw it in everyone's faces? I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Morningstar's photographs, about Clara's letters, about the decades of shame and silence. The only embarrassing thing about our family, I said finally, is how hard we've worked to pretend we're something we're not. We are something, Brandon snapped. We're respected members of this community. We have a reputation to maintain. Built on lies, built on success, built on making something of ourselves instead of wallowing in primitive nonsense. I hung up on him again. This time I turned off my phone and left it off. The Morningstar Heritage Center continued to grow throughout the summer. We hosted our first annual powwow in August, which drew over 1,000 visitors from across the region. The event was covered by Montana Public Radio and featured on the Travel Channel's Hidden America series. Hotels in the area were booked solid for the weekend. I was interviewed by Smithsonian Magazine about cultural preservation and the importance of acknowledging hidden heritage. The article, titled "The House That Memory Built," featured a full-page photograph of me standing in front of the restored house, wearing a traditional Blackfeet shirt that Rose Heavy Runner had made for me. The article described how I'd transformed from a forgotten family member into a guardian of indigenous culture. That article changed everything. Within a week, my story was being shared across social media platforms. The hashtag Reclaiming Morningstar trended on Twitter. Native American communities across the country began sharing their own stories of cultural reclamation and family denial. Academic institutions reached out about speaking engagements and research collaborations. The Cherokee Nation invited me to speak at their Cultural Preservation Conference. The Navajo Nation offered to partner with us on educational exchange programs. The National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., requested artifacts from Clara's collection for a special exhibition about mixed heritage families. By September, I was making more money from speaking fees, consulting work, and grants than I'd ever made in Georgia. The Heritage Center had become financially self-sustaining through workshop fees, donations, and partnerships with universities. I was offered a position as a visiting scholar at the University of Montana, teaching courses on cultural anthropology and family history research. Meanwhile, the story had reached Savannah. The local newspaper ran a feature article about Native Son Returns to His Roots, complete with photographs of the Heritage Center and interviews with tribal members who praised my work. The article mentioned that I was the son of the late Robert and Catherine Granger of historic Bull Street, and the brother of local businessman Brandon Granger. Brandon called me that afternoon. His voice was different this time, strained, almost desperate. "Nate, we need to talk. Can you come home? I'll pay for the plane ticket. This is my home now, Brandon. You know what I mean. Can you come to Savannah? Please. This has gotten out of hand." I was quiet for a moment. What's gotten out of hand? The whole Indian thing. People are talking, it's affecting business. Some of my clients are asking uncomfortable questions about the family. The Historical Society wants to interview me about our indigenous heritage for their newsletter. It's becoming a circus. I'm not responsible for other people's reactions to the truth, but you are responsible for stirring up this mess in the first place. Look, I get it. You were hurt by the will. Maybe Dad and Mom could have been more fair. But did you have to go nuclear? Did you have to make it about race? I didn't make it about race, Brandon. Our family made it about race when they decided to hide and deny part of who we are. We're not Indian, Nate. We're American. We're Southern. We have a heritage here that matters. We're both. And the part you're ashamed of is the part that saved me. Brandon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. What do you want? Do you want money? Do you want part of the estate? What's it going to take to make this go away? I thought about Morningstar's photographs, about Clara's letters, about the community that had embraced me when my own family had cast me aside. I don't want anything from you, Brandon. I never did. Then why are you doing this? Why are you trying to destroy everything we've built? I'm not trying to destroy anything. I'm trying to build something better. The conversation ended there. Brandon never called again. In October, I was invited to speak at the National Conference on Cultural Preservation in Denver. The audience included tribal leaders, government officials, and representatives from major museums and universities. I told the story of Morning Star and Clara, of the family that had tried to erase their own heritage, and of the community that had helped me reclaim it. The speech was recorded and posted on YouTube, where it received over 2 million views. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of hidden heritage, family denial, and cultural reclamation. I heard from descendants of Cherokee families who'd hidden their identity to avoid removal, from Mexican-American families who'd been pressured to pass as white, from Jewish families who'd concealed their religion to escape persecution. The Morning Star Heritage Center became a model for other cultural preservation projects. We began offering consulting services to communities trying to reclaim their own hidden histories. I wrote a book about the experience titled The House That Memory Built, which became a bestseller in the Native American Studies category. 2 years after I'd first arrived in Montana, I received a letter from Harrison and Associates in Savannah. It was from Richard Harrison himself, not his secretary. He informed me that Brandon was facing financial difficulties and had approached him about contesting the will. He wanted to claim that the Montana property had been undervalued and that he deserved a share of whatever I'd built there. Harrison's letter was brief and to the point. He wanted me to know that he'd reviewed the will carefully and found no grounds for Brandon's claim. The property had been left to me free and clear, and any improvements I'd made were entirely my own. He also wanted me to know that he'd followed my story in the news and was proud of what I'd accomplished. I never responded to Brandon's legal threat. I didn't need to. The truth was already out there, documented and preserved and celebrated. The family that had tried to erase their own heritage had been forced to watch as the son they'd discarded became the guardian of something far more valuable than money or social status. Today, the Morning Star Heritage Center welcomes over 10,000 visitors a year. We offer workshops, educational programs, and cultural events that celebrate not just Blackfeet heritage, but the complex, beautiful reality of mixed heritage families. We help people research their own hidden histories and connect with communities they never knew existed. I've learned that the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so beautiful and meaningful that their attempts to diminish you only make their own smallness more obvious. The house they gave me as an insult became the foundation for a legacy that will outlast anything they could have built with their money and their status. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.